Part 1. The Problem Defined. Chapter 1. The Nature and Limitations of Freedom. Most humans rank freedom among the highest of ideals. Freedom, we feel, is every human being's birthright. None has the right to deprive us of it against our will, except, of course, in cases of proven criminality. Even to attempt to remove someone's freedom is regarded as a crime against the essential dignity of what it means to be human. Yet one of the key questions for any of us is, how free am I, if at all? There are people who think that human freedom is severely limited or even illusory. Some of them are atheists, and they ask, how can I be free, since the universe is completely responsible for my existence? Others are believers in God, and they may ask the very same question with a radically different starting point. How free am I, if at all, when God is completely responsible for my existence and behavior? Historically, the longing to be free has played a major role in the human drama. Robert Greene Ingersoll wrote, "What light is to the eyes, what air is to the lungs, what love is to the heart, liberty is to the soul of man." In his State of the Union address in 1941, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt enunciated the famous four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. Such freedoms are almost universally regarded as central to what it means to be human. In the preamble to the UN Charter of Human Rights, the four freedoms are described as the highest aspiration of the common people. Many who possess them to a certain degree tend to take them for granted. For many more, these freedoms seem a distant, impossible dream, unrealizable, yet tantalizing. If we were asked what we mean by freedom, many of us will respond by saying that it means that we should be able to choose what we do, that we should be able to exercise our will, make our own decisions, and be able to implement them, provided we do not infringe other people's space and curtail their freedom. Now we all realize that our freedom, whatever it involves, has certain inbuilt limitations. We are not free to run at 50 kilometers per hour. We are not free to live without food or air, and so on. However, we sense that we are free, provided there is availability and we have the resources to choose between peas and beans, a green shirt, or a blue one. We are free to support one football team rather than another, to tell the truth or to lie, to be kind or to be awkward. In fact, trying to decide between the endless different offerings on the supermarket shelves sometimes makes us wish we did not have so much freedom of choice. We are also well aware that on occasions we voluntarily limit some of our freedoms, sometimes even for pleasure. For instance, if I am a member of a football team, I cannot simply play as I like, inventing the rules as I go along. The whole point of the game is that I limit myself to playing within the rules, subject to the leadership of the captain. That is what makes football a game. There are also more important contexts in which we submit to limitations for the sake of our own safety and security. Different nations choose which side of the road their citizens should drive on. This is an arbitrary choice, but once made, it would be foolish and dangerous to ignore it and simply drive as we choose. More generally, as citizens of a civilized state, we voluntarily submit to the laws of the land, in theory at least, foregoing part of our freedom as individuals. We do this for the sake of the higher good of enjoying the benefits of living together in a peaceful and civilized society. When it comes to the right of human beings to essential freedom, all of us, whatever worldview we hold, would agree that this right should be regarded as inviolable. Sadly, in some parts of the world, there is still a sorry failure to achieve anything approaching the four freedoms. It therefore rightly rouses our indignation to see any human being enslaved, treated as nothing more than a cog in a machine, a mere means to the end of another person's pleasure or profit. Every human being, man or woman, boy or girl, of whatever race, color, or creed, from whatever part of the world, has a right to be treated as an end in himself or herself, never as a mere statistic, or simply as a means of production, but as a person with a name and a unique identity, born to be free. But what is freedom? To what extent do we have it? Two kinds of freedom. From the time of philosophers John Locke and David Hume, distinctions have been made between two kinds of freedom, the liberty of spontaneity and the liberty of indifference. The liberty of spontaneity is the freedom to follow our own motives, to do whatever we want to do, without anybody or anything else, say the government, forcing us to do something we don't want to do, or stopping us from doing what we want to do. Granted that we have the health, ability, money, and necessary circumstances, and are not subject to any external constraint or restraint, most people agree that we have this liberty of spontaneity. The liberty of indifference, libertarian freedom, is the freedom to have done otherwise than, in actual fact, we choose to do on any occasion in the past. Faced with a choice between two courses of action in the future, liberty of indifference would imply that the choice is completely open. I can choose either course of action indifferently, and having chosen the one course of action, I can, on looking back, know that I could equally well have freely chosen the other course. I can choose, or could have chosen, to do X or not X. In this book, when I use the term free will, I shall understand it in this sense. Suppose, for instance, Jim has reached the point where he must choose to marry either Rose or Rachel. He has the liberty of spontaneity. No one is going to force him to marry the one rather than the other. He thinks, however, that he also has the liberty of indifference. He feels that he could just as easily marry either one of them indifferently. Augustine, theologian and philosopher from the 4th and 5th centuries, in common with Hume and many others, would deny that Jim has this kind of liberty. They hold that various complex subconscious physical and psychological processes constrain and determine his choice. Jim is free to marry the girl he chooses. However, the choice he will eventually make is already determined by these deep-seated processes inside him. He is not free to choose and act other than he does choose and act. The upshot of this is that some philosophers think that freedom of spontaneity is compatible with determinism, a view called compatibilism. Of course, libertarian freedom is the direct opposite of determinism. The Oxford Handbook of Free Will says, "Debates about free will in the modern era since the 17th century have been dominated by two questions, not one. The determinist question, is determinism true? And the compatibility question, is free will compatible or incompatible with determinism? Answers to these questions have given rise to two of the major divisions in contemporary free will debates between determinists and indeterminists on the one hand, and between compatibilists and incompatibilists on the other." Freedom and morality. It is beyond dispute that our taste in food or art or music or our choice of spouse, or indeed any of our decisions and choices, are heavily influenced by elements in our physical or psychological makeup. However, whatever inner psychological traumas, desires, or urges may dispose us to break the moral or even the civil law, and we all have these, most of us believe that, as normal human beings, we are still free to choose to control our urges and keep both the moral and the civil law. We are, therefore, morally responsible to do so. This is the only basis on which civilized society can function. Thus, there is a close connection between libertarian freedom and responsibility. Indeed, the very existence of civil and criminal law demonstrates that members of civilized societies have a deep-seated conviction that they possess not only the liberty of spontaneity, but the liberty of indifference. An essential part of what it means to be mature human beings, so discounting here both infants and the severely mentally ill, is the freedom to choose between A and not A, such that we are morally responsible and hence accountable for our actions. The Supreme Court of the United States of America says that a belief in determinism is inconsistent with the underlying precepts of our criminal justice system. To be a moral creature, one first of all needs moral awareness. Human beings, as far as we know, are the only creatures on earth that have such awareness. You can train a dog by rigorous, painful discipline not to steal a joint of beef from the table, but you will never succeed in teaching a dog why it is morally wrong to steal. It has no concept of morality and never will have. Secondly, if one is going to behave morally, one must not only be aware of the difference between moral good and moral evil, one must have sufficient freedom of will in order freely to choose to do good or to do evil. In this respect, there is a whole category difference between even the most advanced computer and a human being. A computer might give you the answers to moral questions which it is programmed to give you, but it would not itself understand or be aware of morality. It cannot, therefore, be held morally responsible for its choices and behavior. If a computer is involved in the design of landmines, which ultimately cause the maiming or death of thousands of children, it makes no sense to accuse it of morally reprehensible behavior. It had no free will or choice. It did what it was programmed to do. It is not a moral being, and so is not responsible for its actions. Human beings, by contrast, are not in that sense programmed, not unless they have been subjected to deep psychological conditioning. They have the ability to choose and, therefore, to make moral decisions. What is more, they generally pride themselves on it. No one would prefer to be a humanoid, computerized robot. When a man has chosen, for instance, to face danger for the sake of standing by his moral principles rather than take the cowardly way out and deny them, he likes to be regarded as having been responsible for his moral choice, and sometimes even to be praised for it. It is usually when we have done something very wrong that we are tempted to deny moral responsibility and to say, "I couldn't help it." Cambridge neuroscientist Harvey McMahon writes, "Free will also underpins ethics, where choices are made in the light of moral principles. In fact, free will underpins all choices. Furthermore, free will underpins the role of intentionality and guilt in the judicial system. The very idea of rules or laws implies that we have a choice or ability to obey. How can the law command us to do certain things if we do not have the ability to do them? Thus, even the concept of obedience implies we have a choice." Indeed, most civilized people regard as reprehensible and dehumanizing the tendency in totalitarian states to treat those who take a moral stand against the state as deviant or ill rather than possessing the moral capacity to choose. C.S. Lewis addressed this danger of regarding wrongdoing as essentially pathological in a brilliant essay entitled The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment. The humanitarian theory removes from punishment the concept of desert. But the concept of desert is the only connecting link between punishment and justice. It is only as deserved or undeserved that a sentence can be just or unjust. Thus, when we cease to consider what the criminal deserves and consider only what will cure him or deter others, we have tacitly removed him from the sphere of justice altogether, Instead of a person, a subject of rights, we now have a mere object, a patient, a case. To be cured against one's will and cured of states which we may not regard as disease is to be put on a level with those who have not yet reached the age of reason or those who never will, to be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals. But to be punished, however severely, because we have deserved it, because we ought to have known better, is to be treated as a human person made in God's image. Lewis proceeds to outline some of the chilling implications of the so-called humanitarian view. They are even more relevant today than they were when he wrote them since, as we shall see, determinism has made great inroads in the areas of psychology and cognitive science. The idea of religion being a neurosis or a delusion, as in the title of Richard Dawkins' bestseller, The God Delusion, has gained considerable traction. Lewis continues, "We know that one school of psychology already regards religion as a neurosis. When this particular neurosis becomes inconvenient to government, what is to hinder government from proceeding to cure it? And thus, when the command is given, every prominent Christian in the land may vanish overnight into institutions for the treatment of the ideological unsound, and it will rest with the expert jailers to say when, if ever, they are to re-emerge. But it will not be persecution. Even if the treatment is painful, even if it is lifelong, even if it is fatal, that will be only a regrettable accident. The intention was purely therapeutic. In ordinary medicine, there were painful operations and fatal operations, so in this. But because they are treatment, not punishment, they can be criticized only by fellow experts and on technical grounds, never by men as men and on grounds of justice. This is why I think it essential to oppose the humanitarian theory of punishment, root and branch, wherever we encounter it. It carries on its front a semblance of mercy, which is wholly false. That is how it can deceive men of good will. For those interested in pursuing this matter further, see the article by Stuart Barton Babbage entitled C.S. Lewis and the Humanitarian Theory of Punishment. Free will and love. Another capacity that would be impossible without free will is the capacity to love. The existentialist writer Jean-Paul Sartre captured this idea well. The man who wants to be loved does not desire the enslavement of the beloved. He is not bent on becoming the object of passion which flows forth mechanically. He does not want to possess an automation, and if we want to humiliate him, we need try to only persuade him that the beloved's passion is the result of a psychological determinism. The lover will then feel that both his love and his being are cheapened. If the beloved is transformed into an automation, the lover finds himself alone. The endowment of men and women with free will inevitably implies the possibility that they might use that free will to choose evil and to reject love, even the love of God. Hence, we must consider some necessary implications of human free will for the structure of nature. If the free will and free choice that God gave to human beings were intended to be genuine, that very fact necessitated that nature should possess a certain degree of autonomy. C.S. Lewis puts it this way. People often talk as if nothing were easier than for two naked minds to meet or to become aware of each other. But I see no possibility of their doing so except in a common medium which forms their external world or environment. What we need for human society is exactly what we have, a neutral something, neither you nor I, which we can both manipulate so as to make signs to each other. I can talk to you because we can both set up sound waves in the common air between us. Lewis then points out that this and other neutral fields, matter, in other words, must have a certain fixed nature a certain autonomy, as Lewis calls it. Suppose the contrary were the case. Imagine, for example, that the world was structured in such a way that a beam of wood remained hard and strong when used in the construction of a house, but it became as soft as grass when I hit my neighbor with it. Or if the air refused to carry lies and insults. Indeed, says Lewis, if the principle were carried to its logical conclusion, evil thoughts would be impossible, for the cerebral matter which we use in our thinking would refuse its task when we attempted to frame them. All matter in the neighborhood of a wicked man would be liable to undergo unpredictable alterations. The result would be, of course, that real freedom of human will and choice would be negated. Nature, then, must have a certain autonomy in order that there can be a society of beings with free will, able to make real moral decisions for good or evil and to carry them out in practice. The potential of evil thought and act to produce evil effects cannot be annulled without simultaneously removing the necessary condition for free will to function. This is a moral universe. So far, so good. But what lies behind all of this? How does this universe come to be a moral universe? And if we are to be free within it, what are the basic conditions for achieving that freedom? Worldview Considerations. A key question is the following: are human beings the highest and sole rationale authority in the world, or, indeed, in the universe, so far as we know, and so far as it affects us? And in that case, are we completely free to decide how we shall behave, what is wrong and what is right, what our ultimate values are, what, if any, is the purpose of our existence, and what our ultimate goal should be? Are we ultimately responsible to none but ourselves? Or is there a God who, having created the universe and us within it, has the right to lay down, and in fact has laid down, not only the physical laws of nature, the boundary conditions of human existence, but also the moral and spiritual laws that are meant to control human behavior? Are humans held responsible by this God for the way they behave, and will they be called upon at last to render account to him? These answers reflect two different worldviews, atheism and theism. They are so utterly distinct that many atheists think that theism is the great enemy of human freedom, and follow the late Christopher Hitchens in regarding the God in whom they do not believe as a great North Korean-style dictator in the sky who is constantly spying on us and restricting our freedoms by his threats. They regard religion as a source of oppression, slavery, and war that stands in direct contradiction to human dignity and freedom. By the same token, many theists point to atheistic ideology as a root cause of an incalculable amount of human oppression and a denial of the basic human right to freedom, particularly in the 20th century. Think of Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot. This point needs careful attention, for there is oppression, violence, and war in many countries today that is directly connected with both atheism and religion. However, not all such systems are violent, and attempts to tar them with the same brush are unfair and, indeed, ludicrous. If we consider the religions in the world today, for example, the peaceful Amish have nothing in common with violent Islamist terrorists. I write as a Christian, a follower of Christ who explicitly repudiated violence and taught his disciples to love their enemies. A common response is that, even if some religions do not espouse violence, the God postulate itself demeans human beings by compromising their autonomy. Karl Marx expressed this view as follows: a man does not regard himself as independent unless he is his own master, and he is only his own master when he owes his existence to himself. A man who lives by the favor of another considers himself a dependent being. But I live completely by another person's favor when I owe to him not only the continuance of my life, but also its creation, when he is its source. Man is the highest being for man. This is the heart of contemporary humanist philosophy. A humanist has cast off the ancient yoke of supernaturalism with its burden of fear and servitude, and he moves on the earth a free man, a child of nature, and not of any man-made gods. It is a sad irony that it is Marx's atheist philosophy itself that might well be the greatest ideological weapon of mass destruction against human freedom that the world has ever seen. Yet, Marx's observation merits more nuanced comment, for the idea is very common that making space for God in our worldview effectively reduces our freedom and so demeans us as humans. Atheists are not the only people who value the instinctive desire of the human heart for freedom. According to theists, that desire is God-given and is both fundamental and central to their experience of God. Religious Jews, for example, will point to the experience that was the original, formative element in their existence and identity as a nation, their nation's deliverance by God from the Egyptian slave labor camps in the second millennium. The clarion call of God's prophet Moses to the then Egyptian Pharaoh, "Let my people go so that they may worship me," has resounded in Jewish hearts down the centuries. Jews have celebrated it ever since in the annual feast of Passover, Pesach. The faith it has fostered in God as sustainer and liberator has maintained their hope during the many oppressions they have since suffered at the hands of totalitarian, anti-Semitic governments. Christians will add that freedom is a core constituent of the gospel of Christ. They will cite Christ's statement of his mission. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Luke 4, verses 18 to 19. Underlying the atheist's desire to throw off any concept of a creator God is their criticism of religion, sadly often born out of personal experience, as an oppressive enslavement of the human spirit and a cause of man's alienation from his true self. Other religious viewpoints must rightly speak to this issue for themselves, but writing as a Christian, I can well understand this objection. For mere religion as distinct from a living personal faith in God easily degenerates into a form of slavery. This is a danger of which the Bible itself is well aware. Paul exhorts his fellow Christians, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm, then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Galatians 5, verse 1. The yoke of slavery that he refers to here is a form of legalistic religion. He earlier describes it as, "Formerly, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those who by nature are not gods. But now that you know God, or rather are known by him, how is it that you are turning back to those weak and miserable principles? Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? You are observing special days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that somehow I have wasted my efforts on you." Galatians 4, verses 8 to 11. As the Christian sees it, the atheist's mistake here is that, in seeking to escape from oppressive, legalistic, superstitious, and opiate religion, he rejects God, who himself denounces such religion. Far from increasing human freedom, it is the rejection of God that actually diminishes it and leads to a pseudo-religious, anthropocentric ideology, whereby each individual man and woman becomes a prisoner of non-rational forces that will eventually destroy them in complete disregard of their humanity. However, it is not our purpose to pursue these issues here, or further discuss the tension between theism and atheism over freedom in general, We shall focus instead on the increasing emphasis on determinisms of various kinds, both among atheists and theists, mainly Christians. Some atheists believe that nature's laws ultimately do the determining, while some theists believe that God does it.